Autism spectrum disorder, otherwise known as ASD, is a complex developmental condition and it involves challenges within social interaction, like being able to talk to people and hold a conversation, maintaining eye contact. It also affects things like speech and nonverbal communication. Some people are just not able to talk at times, and restricted or repetitive behaviors, like shaking your leg, for instance. Um, so the effects of ASD and the severity of symptoms are different for each person. It really depends on if you're high functioning, low functioning, and what symptoms really express themselves the most. So, autism spectrum disorder is typically diagnosed in early childhood. Usually, the most obvious signs present themselves around 2 to 3 years old. However, some children with autism develop normally until they reach about 5 years old when they stop acquiring or they lose skills that they already had previously. According to the CDC, 1 in 59 children are estimated to have autism. ASD is also 3 to 4 times more common in boys than in girls, and many girls with ASD exhibit less obvious signs compared to males. And this is because females have been studied and it's been found that they exhibit this behavior known as masking, and this is something that they do much easier than boys. So masking is basically like reading a room and mimicking the actions of other people so you fit in better. So autism is a lifelong condition, and while many people believe it can be treated or quote cured, um, it's something that you're stuck with, but that does not hinder your ability to still have an independent, productive, or a fulfilling life. So, with that being said, my topic is focusing specifically on individuals with ASD and how they are able to interact with law enforcement. So, the social and communication barriers that they have can make them particularly vulnerable in issues dealing with law enforcement. They also present a separate set of concerns when they have contact with the criminal justice system, typically as victims or witnesses of abuse, or offenders or suspicious people. Specific measures are being taken to improve the communication and to avoid misinterpretation and other indicating behaviors. Um, Without the benefit of having a basic knowledge and understanding of autism, criminal justice professionals often struggle with meeting the needs of those with ASD. So, like I said, ASD increases the vulnerability for both becoming a victim and an offender of crime. So, many people like to try and create a link that does not exist between having ASD and the likeliness of you becoming an offender. There is no study or evidence that accurately proves this. And actually, most people with ASD are known to be law-abiding citizens because people with ASD, they thrive for repetitive behaviors, so they want a very strict and structured schedule. So that means they're going to adhere to all of the rules and regulations that are put in front of them. So the process of arrest, investigation, trial, and imprisonment are often extremely difficult for individuals with ASD. Explanation factors associated with the offenses indicated that autism spectrum disorder characteristics, such as misunderstandings, obsessions, and idiosyncratic beliefs or behaviors, were frequently involved. But stress was the most common explanation by the participants. So, when someone with ASD is overly stressed, they might do something also known as stimming, where they might, shake, they're going to move around, they might rock back and forth, something like that to try and help them calm down. So the overall, there is a limited understanding of ASD in the criminal justice system, which needs to be significantly improved to secure the legal protection, but also the safety of those with ASD. So there's a few common themes that have popped up. However, the top four issues that people with ASD and law enforcement seem to have are the potential for misinterpretations of behaviors, the helpfulness of an identification system or symbol for ASD, the need for interactive mandatory training for law enforcement officers, and importance of building community connections between law enforcement officers and individuals with ASD. So this research is focused predominantly on police departments. So, police officers, they are in and about communities all the time. They are constantly dealing with the public. And so they need to know how to handle different people within the public. Like, If they approach someone that looks to be under the influence of drugs or alcohol, they have received specific training to know how to handle those situations. So right now, there are actually very little studies in this field. And overall, the general consensus is that law enforcement just needs to be more educated. On average, there's only about 20 minutes spent on educating law enforcement and like on ASD, but autism spectrum disorder is often kind of grouped into the general mental health. So if you're dealing with like a distressed person, someone that's overly anxious, someone that is very suicidal, like those are all things that are just kind of wrapped in together with ASD. So there's no specific training on it. And most times they don't even offer that. And if you would like training for ASD and many other things, you actually have to pay for it out of your own pocket, go on your own time, and receive a certificate. And they call it autism sensitivity training. So, although most people with ASD don't commit crimes, courts must understand how to handle requests to admit expert testimonies and those cases where a criminal defendant shows signs and symptoms of ASD or just a diagnosis. Because ASD often impacts not just the individual's reasoning process in crime, but also their ability to fully assist the counsel in their defense or offense in preparing a defense or navigating through the plea bargaining process, courts shouldn't really shy away from at least hearing the testimony on the subject, despite the fact that ASD symptoms, like aggression could be one of them, may resemble conduct of offenders that are not diagnosed with ASD. So to further complicate this, the fact that those diagnosed with ASD may respond in an inconsistent manner based on external factors such as emotions, familiarity with the environment that they're in, as well as the people, or sensory pressures and the situation at hand. Courts don't uniformly, they're not really receptive to expert testimony about ASD, special challenges that confront individuals, or whether the disorder warrants the use of diminished capacity to relieve the actor or of the culpability or reduce the charge of a sentence. Basically, it can be really difficult to differentiate between conduct that is consistent with a characteristic of ASD and conduct that's typical of an offender. What's clear is that the court should be, at the very least, considering expert evidence regarding defendants with ASD diagnosis and how that related to the intent and the aspect of crime. So, law enforcement officers are dealing with the public, like I said, and because of this, law enforcement needs to be educated on how to handle anyone in any situation. So, in the wake of a good number of highly publicized cases of police brutality over the past few years, this has led to efforts to make law enforcement more transparent. And despite their increased scrutiny, statistics on incidents specifically involving people with autism are nearly impossible to come by. So one organization, they're called Spectrum, they sent out surveys to 30 of the largest law enforcement departments of the US about their reporting practices. Of the 18 that responded, none tracked numbers that identified how many of the individuals with ASD they had contact with. Without that information, it's really hard to know how often or why people with autism come into contact with the police. So the purpose of my topic overall is to bring more knowledge about how the criminal justice system treats people with autism spectrum disorder. The ASD community has specific behavioral patterns that are all too often mistaken for noncompliance across law enforcement personnel. But why is that? One of the best ways to gauge the level of understanding that law enforcement has is to focus on their training and how much they've received on a particular topic. So officers, they're just not really adequately trained to deal with the overarching mental health issues. And they receive minimal training on mental health and received basically no specialized training on any particular illness. So the research basically takes a look at how to effectively help people with autism. The ultimate question being, is a lack of training and preparedness about autism within law enforcement to blame for situations easily escalated with people with ASD when they come into contact with the criminal justice system?